Hello guys, welcome to another video series for Cmdlet 101. Today we are going to look into Cmdlets parameter, a little bit more deep dive than what we did in the last video. Okay, so in this video we will talk about Cmdlets parameters. It's very important to understand the behavior of a parameter or parameters for Cmdlets that you might use. Okay, we will use the same get process commandlet as our reference, and this is the commandlet we will use as a reference, continuing from our last video. Okay, so let's first run a help on get process and see what's the output. So we will do a get help and we will do a get process, and you want to see what parameters get process have. So I will use a parameter called parameter, sorry, and I'll use the wildcard asterisk symbol to get all the parameter that is there for get process. Okay, so what this will do is, now this will give you a complete output of all the parameters that get process has. So we will go through each one of this and we will see what we can understand. So let's understand each of these parameters. So the first property which you see for any parameters is that required property. So what does this mean? This represents if it is set, that is, if this is set to true, it is mandatory to provide a value to this parameter. If PowerShell does not get an input for this parameter, it will prompt on the screen. For the particular commandlet which we are discussing right now is the get process, and if you see, none of them except ID is marked as true. So but there is a catch of that as well. So by default you have to understand something called parameter name set. What is the default parameter name set? And in that name set, if it is marked as true, then only you will have to provide a value for that, or else if it's not there, then it's kind of treated as a wildcard. Okay, so if it's marked as required, you have to provide the value. A good example I think we would have seen in the last video, where we had used write output, where we have to give an input object for write output to show that on the screen. Similarly, if you see the next one, which is said positions, that's another properties. So this can be either be named. So if you see here, it in ID it's named, in file version info it's named, but for name it is 0. So that's a numeric number which represents the position of that parameters. Okay, so if it is named, then you'll have to call the parameter by name. So I will run something, say get process, I don't know, 5, so I'll say ID, and then I'll say I have to actually first get all the processes to see what okay, so now I'll clear it off. I know one process ID, that is the PowerShell process ID, that is 9788. So now if I run get process and I say ID 9788, I'll get the PowerShell process coming back at me, because I used minus ID and specified the process, because it accepts named value. As you would see here, ID would expect me to give that minus ID which I just used, right? I cannot just say 9788 and it will not give me anything in return, because it says that cannot find a process with the name 9788, because it's expecting this one, which is the position parameter 0, where it expects a value directly coming into the commandlet without calling the name of it. So if I had said get process and said PowerShell, now I would get a valid return, because that's the parameter is expecting the named value. Okay, so the position is 0, and that's where I've passed the PowerShell string, and it has seen that there is a PowerShell process which is running, and it has given me that return. So that is the difference between a named parameter and a position parameter, where if a parameter is named, you actually have to specify that parameter using the dash or a hyphen to call that. Or else if it's a position parameter, you just have to know at what position you have to provide that input string. So for example, if let's say there was another parameter and it was ID and or whatever, and it had a position number 1, so the next input could have been that particular input for that parameter. You don't have to actually specify minus ID and give that ID number, but you could have just put a space and give 23 or whatever the ID number is, and that would have worked because it's position number 2. But if you give something here, let's say 1 2 3 4, it's expecting the name parameter to be 1 2 3 4, and it will not be successful because there is no process which is running as 1 2 3 4, because it's trying to trying to match the name of the process, not the ID of the process. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And so you have to, very important to see what your parameter is. Is it a name parameter? It's a mandatory or not? What position it is, if it's positioned or not? So that's something that you have to keep in mind. The next is we have to see is the next thing on our list is accept pipeline. We will explore pipeline in the next video, but what it means that the parameter will accept value from the pipeline. So we will take a look what pipeline is when we explore PowerShell pipelines. Okay. The next one on the list is parameter set name. And this is a very interesting one because as I would clear my screen and come to a position where I can show you this, so I can run this command here. And if you see, everything has a parameter set name. So all the parameter which is there in get process has a parameter set name. So the first one, let's ignore that. Let's just concentrate on ID and name because that's how we get processes. We can see other options like computer name from when we learn about get process as a part of a different video. But here if you see in ID, it says the parameter set name is ID with username and ID. Okay, that means that what you can use multiple parameters. So for example, get process. So I had get process 9788. But if I want to use a second parameter with it, it must share a parameter set name with me. So if ID belongs to ID with username and ID, that is the set name. If I want to use any one of these parameters, that is name, module, input object, include username or file version info, that also should have a parameter set name ID, or else it will not work because you're using a different set for different parameters which is belonging to a different set. So for example, here if I say get file version info, it will work. But if you see, if I try this with name and I try to say PowerShell as the name of that input, it will not work because it says parameter set name cannot be resolved with the specified named parameters. So that is something you have to keep in mind. So when you actually run get help instead of parameter, if you run syntaxes, so if you just say get process full and you go up here, if you see here it says syntaxes. So all of these syntaxes, it means something. That means every parameter set has to be run with the member of the parameters of that particular set. You cannot go from one set to another if that particular parameter is not member of that set. That is something you cannot do. So you have to remember, if you are using get process here, if you are using ID, then you cannot use name because name and ID are not sharing any parameter set name. Okay. Another interesting observation which you might have seen is when I ran that command, this file version info, I didn't pass any information to it. That is because that's a switch parameter. Now, how do you understand what is a switch parameter and what is a which accepts strings, which accepts what? So if you run that full help here, you would understand what that accepts. So if I go here And if you see the syntaxes, here it says the name parameter is expecting a string input. The computer name parameter is actually expecting a string input. The module parameter, the file version parameter, they are not expecting anything. So they just switch. So you just put the parameter name and they will work, or they're supposed to do what they're going to give you as an output. So that's what something you have to keep in mind. What parameter is expecting what? You have to see it from this syntax page, not in the parameter section. In the parameter section, it does say computer name. It expects a string. File version info, it doesn't expect anything. ID, on the other hand, expects an int, that is your integer value. That's any numeric value. And then input object, that expects a process. We will see this because we cannot see this right now because it accepts pipeline value. We will see how that works in pipeline, our next video. So that's it. And the last topic is dynamic. Dynamic parameter is a little complicated area where it's much high level than an advanced topic of PowerShell. So what it does, if it's set to true, that means if it's set to true, it will only work and gets the correct events using other parameters. So when you are creating when you say, let's say a good example would be get item. So this is a good example, but this is a very advanced topic and it's generally used in scripting and all those things. So it's not that simple enough for anybody to understand straight away. Once in a while you will use it. So if you say C and first let's do a different one, cert colon current user. Now I use something called code signing certificate. Now this didn't give me any result because my current user doesn't have any certificate, but let's change the path into something called C:/ and here I get an error because a parameter cannot be found that matches a parameter code signing cert, but it didn't give me the same error when I was using cert: current user, because when I used the path parameter and I passed in a certificate repository to it, that is where it can find a certificate file, that parameter was valid. That means it dynamically created the code signing cert parameter. Similarly, when I use the path parameter using a drive letter, it could not dynamically generate the code signing cert parameter. So that's a little advanced concept where you have to understand what why we would need this, and when we would need this. So something like if you're using multiple parameters and you have to expect you are expecting the users to give something in that particular parameter, like say a name or a string or a map ID, and if it receives the correct value there, other set of parameters gets available to you dynamically. So that's what dynamic parameter is. Hopefully it's not that much important as well, because it's rarely used in PowerShell day-to-day activities. Okay, so that's all about parameters. We will use parameters a lot, and I think we will understand it more when we use the commandlets from time to time, and I will come back to the topic again to see and use them, like get process. When we see get process as a commandlet, right now we are just trying to understand parameters. So when we see get process as a parameter, as a commandlet, when you will understand better than what we discussed today. That's it. We will use another introductory video which we would talk about pipelining in the next one. So how PowerShell uses pipeline, and looking forward you guys to join me then. Till then, see you next time. Bye bye.